Hi, I'm Johnny from UltimatePaperMache.com, and this week I found out that there is a way that we can use the DAP drywall junk compound to make paper mache clay. Now, I've been telling you don't buy DAP if you want to make paper mache clay, because if you add glue to the DAP drywall junk compound, it turns into little rubber balls. But it's almost impossible now to get any drywall junk compound that isn't made by the DAP company. I used to really like the Proform brand because you could get it at Walmart. It was really cheap and it worked really well. Well, you can't get it anymore. You can find other brands if you really hunt for it, but the DAP has pretty much taken over the market here in the United States. But there is a way to make paper mache clay if we use some glue that we make ourselves. Glue that isn't not entirely glue, it's kind of a form of paste. And the recipe is from Rich of the Ghoulish Cop YouTube channel. He hasn't even posted a video for 6 years now, and he told us about this recipe. I think it was back in 2012. And I linked to his video way back then, and we had a lot of conversations back and forth about it, and I just never tried it before because it's so much easier to just pour the glue out of the bottle than to go ahead and make it yourself. But I found out this week that it really does work. If you can't find any drywall junk compound except DAP, you can make paper mache clay if you make your own glue. It's not going to be exactly the same. It's almost as strong. I don't think, maybe not quite. Well, I don't know. It's all, I mean, this is like a 32nd of an inch thick, and it's not easy to break. So if there is any difference as far as strength goes, it's not enough difference to matter. It holds detail really well. As you can see, I don't know if you can see those scratches that I put in it, but the detail is fine. It doesn't feel quite the same when you're putting it over your armature. It's just a very small difference that you might not notice. So it's not exactly the same as using the Elmer's glue, but it works with DAP. So if you can't find drywall junk compound in any other brand, and you're willing to take a little bit of extra time to make your own glue, then you can make paper mache clay with this brand of drywall junk compound. And it isn't all that hard. I mean, it took a little bit of time, but really not that much. Certainly not worth waiting for like 12 years. So I'm really embarrassed. But now that I finally did try it out, let's go ahead and see how it's done. The first thing we're supposed to do is put a cup of water in our pan and turn it up to high because we're going to be boiling it. Then I'm going to go back and put 3 teaspoons of cold water in this cup. So we've got our little bit of water, and put 2 teaspoons of cornstarch in there. Here's 1 and 2. If you've ever thickened anything with cornstarch, you do know that you have to start out putting it with a little bit of cold water, mix it up really good, and then you can put it in the hot water without getting lumps. So that's all we're really doing. We're making some water gravy. That sounds good, doesn't it? This is almost hot. I'm just going to pour it in there. And you don't have to cook it very long. You just want to cook it until it kind of stiffens up a little bit, I think. And it's going to turn clear. There's hardly any cornstarch in this mixture, so it's not going to make it very thick. I don't really know what the purpose of the cornstarch is, actually. And that's plenty long enough. That's more than cooked. It's clear. Doesn't look like anything really happened to it. It's not thick by any means. And next step is to put a cup of flour and 1/3 of a cup of sugar. So to mix that together. We're going to use 1½ cups of water in total, but Rich wants us to add just half of it this time and then mix it up really well. And then we'll add the rest of it a little bit later. Looks like I'm going to need a whisk to do this. Now I'm supposed to add the rest of my water. Our store actually ran out of white vinegar, So I'm using some apple cider vinegar, which probably isn't what Rich used. But there seems to be a shortage of vinegar for some reason. I don't know why. And we need 1/3 of a cup of that liquid starch that we just made. So get that back out. Here's the liquid starch. We just made it. It's still warm. I'm making a mess here. Rich says that we can put this in the refrigerator or even the freezer and keep it, you know, for the next time we want to make some paper mache clay. Okay, it's starting to thicken already because the stove was already a little bit warm when I started, but I can feel it, and it's getting stuck on the bottom of the spatula already. You might not want to use a burner that's quite as hot as I did. That might have been why it's getting thick so fast. But on the other hand, maybe it doesn't matter. You said to keep cooking it until it thickened, and that's what we got. And his was not this thick. That's interesting. But I don't really see why it would make any difference, to be honest. You're going to be mixing it up with the drywall joint compound and stuff, so I really can't see why it would make any difference if it's thick or not thick. But even though it did start out kind of lumpy, you know, it was getting stiff at the bottom of the pan first, obviously, but it's nice and smooth now, so this should work just fine. I've got my 1 1/4 cup of damp toilet paper, and I'll put a link to the original recipe so you can see how I made sure that I had the right amount of water squeezed back out again. The recipe calls for 1 cup of the drywall joint compound. We need 3/4 of a cup of Elmer's, but this time we're using our do-it-yourself glue. So let's get this started here. I mixed it for a while. I think it's about time for me to add the flour and a little bit of oil. You don't have to use the mineral oil if you don't want to, of course. And I don't know how much flour it's going to take because I've never used this DIY glue before. So I'm just going to put, maybe that's 1/4 of a cup. Okay, let's see. It's getting stiff enough it's going to start crawling up the beaters. So I'm going to start just adding a little bit more flour and mix it in by hand. Oh no, this is really close already. No, I'm going to leave it this way, and if I have some area where I need it to be a little bit thicker, I'll add a little bit of flour to that. This is, I think, exactly what I want. Look how nice and smooth I'm able to get that with the spatula. Isn't that nice? Obviously it's going to have some texture because of the paper, but it's smoothing off really pretty. Now, for the big test, I'm going to put it on some plastic. I'm going to spread it out really thin, and we'll see what happens when it's dry. I put a little bit of plastic on this piece of cardboard just because I want to test the strength of the paper mache clay itself without the cardboard being stuck to it. So I'm going to put it over this plastic. And I'm going to need some water if I'm going to make that flatter and smoother, so I'll go get some. Okay. Since I'm going to be taking this off of the plastic and kind of testing it, it's not really fair because I don't normally make a hollow piece with just a really thin layer of the original paper mache clay. So I'm going to put a little bit over this too, because this will give us an idea what it's like when we're actually using it the way people normally would. So I'm just going to put it on over here. And now I'm probably using it a little bit thicker because, you know, just trying to push it down into the dips and everything. So this will be an interesting test. We'll get to see how it works both ways. Maybe I'll make just a couple of marks in it to see what happens to those when it dries. The only things that I really wanted to do on the bunny were to get back some of the dips that I kind of covered up because I was in a hurry when I was making her. It doesn't feel the same as the original version with the Elmer's glue. I don't know how to explain it exactly, but it doesn't feel the same. Okay, what I've learned from just playing around with it for just a minute is that I was getting the knife too wet. It'll kind of almost fall apart into its separate pieces of paper if you get it too wet. I also found out, which I probably should have known, that once you start using an actual sculpting tool, like some small thing, instead of just pushing around with a giant knife, it actually works a lot better. So I'm actually feeling fairly positive about it right now. It doesn't feel the same way as the original Paper Mache Clay, but I think it's going to be okay. Whoops, that was really, really skinny. Look at that, but maybe 1/64 of an inch. And I did crack it. I don't know if that would have happened with the original recipe or not. I mean, look how skinny it is. And I can't bend it. This is cool. This one, I can still poke it a little bit, and it's just not, well, you saw me add quite a bit more on this thing, just because I had to fill in all the dips and crannies in here, and so it just isn't quite dry all the way through, you can tell. So you obviously wouldn't want to paint that now, but once it gets dry, like on the edges here, it's really hard. I scratched some marks in here on purpose, and then that was where the knife put the serrations on it. Those came out really nicely. So you definitely can put some really nice details in your sculpture using this material. Now, one last test. I want to see if it's easier to sand than the original Paper Mache Clay, because it really is hard to sand. You can sand it. I'm not saying it's easy, but you can sand it. It is possible. And you know I'm too lazy to sand this little guy. That was too hard. This is just the drywall joint compound. I'm putting it on just like less than paper thin. Really, really thin. I did paint the rabbit because I said in my last video when I showed you how I made her, I told you that I was going to paint her and show you how she looked when it was all done. But I didn't spend any time on it at all because I was in a real hurry to get this video out. If you can't find any brand of drywall joint compound except DAP, we now know that you can use it anyway if you have the time to go ahead and make your own glue. Now, I know it's a little bit late, but Rich, if you happen to be still watching this channel, thank you so much for sharing the recipe on your channel, the Ghoulish Cop. By the way, if you haven't seen any of his videos, you might want to go check them out. I'll put a link down below for the original glue video that he put out, and he's also got a lot of really interesting videos about Halloween decorations. So if you haven't seen those, be sure and go ahead and watch those. If you happen to go ahead and try this using the DAP drywall joint compound and the do-it-yourself glue, please let us know what you think of it. I think it's just a little bit different, but I can't say exactly why. But I do think it's going to work just fine for our sculptures, even if it is just maybe not quite as strong, a little bit easier to sand, just a teensy bit. Maybe not quite as smooth, although it's really hard for me to say because I haven't used it long enough, and I'm hoping that you'll give some feedback and let us know what you think. If you found other ways to make the Paper Mache Clay with the DAP brand drywall joint compound that I haven't thought of yet, please let us know that too. So go ahead and put some comments down below. In the next video, I'm going to use what was left over from this batch to hopefully make some wool on a lamb. So that's going to be kind of fun. Go ahead and watch for that video. Go make something and come visit me. ultimatepapermache.com. I'll see you there.